Do you want more success, more growth, more results? Then it's time for the Boundless Success Accelerator from the Modern Observer Group. This isn't your average coaching program. It's where top performers come to dominate. Weekly group sessions, on-demand coaching, a community that's got your back, and a power-packed library of tools to supercharge your business and career. No more excuses, no more waiting. Get in, level up, and start building the life you've been dreaming about. Visit us at modernobserver.com/boundless success to join today. Let's get you to the next level.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Happily Never After show. I'm your host, Kate Mollison, and this week with me, I have my own personal business coach and dear friend, Eric Lopkin. Thanks so much for being here with us.
Thanks for asking. It's great to be here.
I love it. And I know we've podcast swapped before in the past, but just for the listeners who aren't familiar with the program or with you, give us a little bit of backstory and what brings you to the grief conversation.
Yeah, well, as your listeners may or may not know, we actually started Happily Never After as a series of special episodes of two of our other podcasts, Success Showcase and Lighting the Candle, A World That Works. So it was great to be able to launch this platform. And as a business coach, which is my primary profession, this is actually something we have to deal with on a regular basis. Because when you're dealing with an individual, grief affects everything they do. And when you're dealing with an organization, the organization has to be able to keep going when members of that organization are suffering and help them through it. Otherwise, they're going to start falling apart also. So it's something we've done quite a bit of work with.
So, Eric, as a business coach, when you're dealing with business owners or employers who are finding that there's a lack of positive company culture or maybe a lack of synergy between them and their employees, what are some things that you can coach them to help identify if that maybe is grief or if it really is a performance issue that needs to be dealt with?
Well, ideally, the process should start before they start noticing problems.
Mm,
The first step is that companies need to create environments where people feel comfortable to share personal information. And unfortunately, there are loads of businesses that do not promote this. There is a very old mindset in business that you walk in the door in the morning, you leave
mm,
your personal life at home, and then you walk out the door in the evening and leave your business in the workplace. And it doesn't work that way. And the
right.
fact of the matter is it's never worked that way. People cannot segment that way.
Mm,
So you have to create an environment where people are comfortable sharing what they're going through. Now, because you have an environment where they're comfortable doing it doesn't mean they're going to volunteer that information. So
mm,
then you have to be able to create a secondary environment where you can ask the questions. And that actually, again, starts before the problem hits by having regular meetings with employees that aren't performance evaluations, that aren't, this is what you're doing wrong. You need to promote the idea that meeting with your boss is not a bad thing. It's not a punitive
mm.
thing.
Right? Like, how many of us remember that, like, icky belly feeling when your boss comes up to you and is like, we need to have a meeting or meet me in my office, or, and you're like, oh, it's that you're in trouble with dad energy, but we want to reframe that and rework that where it's not that you're in trouble feeling. We want to encourage that quote open door philosophy, even though that isn't actually a thing, I feel like. What are your thoughts on the
Right.
phrase open door?
Um, I mean, open door, I think, unfortunately, is overused. You're right about the environmental feeling. You said dad. I tend to equate it to the feeling when you're in like elementary school and you're called to the principal's office.
Oh
You
yeah.
know, it's
When your name gets called over the intercom or something, that
right.
like
Yeah, yes,
feeling. Yeah, yeah.
yes. So managers actually need to start this from day one. When they get the management position, they need to start having meetings with their subordinates that are literally just, let's grab a cup of coffee. I want to hear what you have to think. And
Yeah.
where the boss isn't saying, well, this is what we're doing and this is what I need from you. It's, well, this is what we've got planned. What do you think about that? How do you think, you can fit
Mm.
into this? Something that traditionally has been lacking in the workplace is the fact that the frontline workers, like I'll use retail for example.
You
The
know that's
sale
my bread and butter.
Yes, the sales folks on the floor, the cashiers,
Mm.
they need to be listened to because they're the ones actually dealing with the customers. They're the ones that hear the complaints, that see the problems that are going on. And unfortunately, there are still too many businesses that make decisions from the top down without
Mm.
taking feedback from the bottom up. And it really does need to work that way. So if you're transforming your organization that way, everybody feels that, yes, they can talk about things in the workplace because they've actually been solicited to do so. Their feedback is welcomed. So
Mm.
then, when you actually have the problem, you can have that meeting where you're talking to the person and saying, you know, we've noticed something's not quite right. Is something going on? Are
Yeah.
you okay?
It becomes more of a seek to understand versus
Yes.
a punitive reactionary conversation.
Right. And that's key is that these conversations should never be punitive.
Mm.
You know, if something is actually going on in the person's life, that needs to be taken into account. Now, if the person is not doing their work because they don't feel like it, yes, that ends up being a punitive
kind of
conversation,
kind of a, an obtuse example for sure, but I
Yes.
think I think to a degree that kind of also harkens on the employee's willingness to share, right? Because the employer can't get an accurate pulse on what's going on if the employee, say the environment, the culture, everything is designed for safety and security, but some people just aren't the type to disclose personal information. They very much feel that personal stuff is personal, and it's hard for the employer to bridge that gap if people aren't willing. So I think to your point, it does have to go both ways.
Yes,
The
yes,
environment
it
has to be
does.
conducive to it, but the modern employee also has to understand that there's a little bit of an investment, an emotional investment on our side where we have to be a little willing to be transparent and be
Right.
human.
And it's more than just an emotional investment. And this actually needs to be set up at the hiring stage.
Mm,
And ideally it should take place during the interview process rather than after the person is hired, where the organization needs to make very clear, look, these are going to be your responsibilities. And that includes if there's a problem, you have to let us know. You can't expect us to read your mind, but
yeah.
there are certain things that are expected from you. And this is starting to become more common, primarily as more businesses try to get folks to come back to the office after working virtually. You have to actually set forth. Our expectations are this is a 9 to 5 job in the office, or this is, we have flexible hours, but we're expecting you to put in 40 hours a week, whether or not that's, from, between 7 a.m. and 6 p.m., wherever you fit them in, either working virtually
Right.
or in the office. You have to be very clear about what those expectations are. And if somebody is suffering grief and they're falling short of those expectations and not willing to talk about it, that
Mm,
actually shifts the responsibility away from the employer to the
yes.
employee. Because by taking the job, they've agreed to be responsible for these things. And if they're not, they've got to explain why.
Yeah. I often say grief gives you permission to be less than ideal, less than perfect. I always say an a-hole. That's the grief gives you permission
Right.
to be an a-hole, but it does not absolve you of the consequences of being an a-hole. And the same thing goes at work with your employer. You get to have your grief, you get to have your emotion, you get to have your process, and you don't have to share anything with anyone. But if you don't, there are consequences. And
Exactly.
so, good, bad, or indifferent, it's going to work itself out in the wash. But if you don't participate in the experience, you can't expect people to provide the space and support and resources. So it becomes a what's the word I'm looking for? Symbiotic relationship between the employer and the employee. And I feel like the way our world is set up right now, that's not the way that business works. Most commonly, you're probably going to encounter business owners who already have a process and a procedure and a staff and things. And they come to you and say, I've now had this awareness. What can we do to help them start to shift that needle in the right direction if their machine is already in motion?
Well, there's certain things, and it actually starts with the business processes.
Mm,
Most businesses have some sort of processes set up for what they're doing. They generally fall short in documenting these processes.
mm,
So processes need to be documented so that, I mean, first of all, when a new employee comes in, they should literally be able to pull a checklist, look at the process, and go, okay, I can do this. I have to do this, this, and this, and not try to figure it out on their own.
mm.
Now, processes always need to be improved, but you do need to start with the baseline process. Now, the key to creating a good process is that you can check out and still complete the process. There is a fantastic book by David Allen called Getting Things Done.
Mm.
And the way he describes it is that your processes need to be simple enough so that if you have a severe flu, you can still do these.
I love that.
So the processes need to be simple enough so that if somebody is suffering through grief, if they're suffering through depression, if something is they can almost mentally check out, pull out the process, and follow along to get things done
It's a
while they're
roadmap.
dealing. Yes.
Yeah, we love it. We love a roadmap. And I think so often in businesses, especially up until the pre-COVID era, PC, if you will,
Yeah.
pre-COVID, in that era, businesses don't really didn't really care to understand dip in productivity and dip in profitability. But I think that in that post COVID mindset, businesses are realizing that modern employees aren't putting up with those guidelines anymore. So I love the suggestion of putting that roadmap in place for employers. It takes the thought out of it and it still creates that space and that intention.
Now, even before COVID, we started to see the shift
Mm,
because every business knows there are three audiences that they have to deal with. There is the employer, the employees, the customers, and the shareholders slash stakeholders.
mm,
Now, different businesses would put their focuses in different places. Public companies receive a lot of pressure to put their focus on the shareholder.
Mm.
A lot of people, businesses, they focus on customer service. This is, their bellwether. It's making the customer happy, and this, builds business. But here's the truth is that if you focus on the employees, happier employees provide better customer service and a better customer experience. So when
Yes.
the customers have a better experience because the employees are having a better experience, it causes revenues to go up, and that makes the shareholder experience better.
Yeah.
So by focusing on the employees, you're actually benefiting all three audiences. And one of the best examples, and you can read more about this in the book Fish, is that there is a fish market in Seattle called the Pike's Place Fish Market, and the business was failing. Well, what the employees decided is, well, you know what? We have to be here 8 hours a day, 7 days a week, whatever their hours, are their shifts. We might as well start having fun at work because otherwise we know the business is failing. What can we do? For some of them, it's like, well, we might as well enjoy our time here. And they started doing things like throwing the fish across the market to get from place to place.
Wow.
And they just started having fun with it. And then they would start grabbing their customers and tossing fish to customers. The Pike's Place Fish Market now, and this is, I believe, almost 20 years later, is a thriving business that's also a tourist attraction because people
Yeah.
come to see how they're enjoying themselves. The employees basically put on a show while they're doing their work.
And that was self-driven. That wasn't a direction. That wasn't it's
Right.
not a farce or a false or an act that they're putting on because they're told to for brand sake. It was the employees taking ownership and control of their own workplace experience.
Yes. And of course, the owners saw this and encouraged it, which is something that business owners and managers really do need to do. They need to pay attention to what the employees are doing.
Mm.
To, if there's a problem, employees will generally try to boost their own morale. Nobody wants to come to a workplace 8 hours a day that's dragging them down. So when employees find something that works, the employer has to encourage that.
Yeah, and I feel like a lot of times employers feel they tend to be trapped in their own box or in their own way. And it's they see
Yes.
doing something outside of already dictated policy or intention or vision, and they're not willing to kind of open up those blinders a little bit to see the forest through the trees. I think they miss the point a lot. And the point is employee engagement, employee happiness, employee wellness. They miss that because it's like, well, that's not what I want, or that's not how I would do it. Or so how do we
Right.
coach business owners to get out of their own way?
Well, that's actually a major obstacle. There's two main things that tends to happen with business owners and managers. Owners look at their business as this is their baby. They're creating this.
Mm.
And there comes a point in the lifespan of every business where the owner has to let go. And it is the same problem that parents have with kids,
Yeah.
where, it's like, well,
Letting them
look,
leave the nest.
yes, this is my baby. I have to protect it. I have to do it this way. So it is a very parental feeling that owners have to let go of. And before I started my business, when I worked for a consulting company in corporate, we used to have a joke saying the owner at the company had this brilliant talent for finding amazing people and then getting in the way of letting them do their jobs.
Mm.
And
I feel like
unfortunately,
I've had that boss
yeah,
before.
it is very common. It's
And it's super
incredibly,
frustrating from the employee perspective.
yes, yes, it is. And the other trap that managers fall into is that, well, this is the way we've always done it.
Oh, I hate that.
Well, you know what? In 1840, that was a legitimate argument. You
Right?
know?
Just because it's the way we've
Right.
always done it doesn't mean
In
it's
the
the right way.
in the 21st century, not only is that not a valid argument, it's actually killing your business.
Yes.
5 years ago, who would have imagined needing to integrate AI into your business?
A year ago,
Uh,
even, I feel like it was
Yeah,
still fresh a year ago.
10 years ago, who would have imagined having to integrate virtual meetings into your business and being
Mm.
and being able to do so without investing hundreds of $1,000s into a conference room for it to make it happen?
Or in equipment or in,
Yes,
production or whatever, because 10 years ago, that would have cost companies a lot of money.
exactly. The thing is, things are only impossible until somebody does them.
Hmm.
Again, five years ago, you couldn't just sit down at your computer and connect with folks around the world. 10 years ago, you wouldn't have imagined doing the bulk of your work on a phone.
Right?
But I mean, this is a continuous process because if you keep going back, you know, go back to 1940. Who would have imagined flying everywhere to have conferences and business meetings?
Hmm.
Go, but
Yeah.
technology is always moving forward. The problem a lot of business folks have is that now the pace of technological advancement is so fast that this is the way we've always done it means you're a dinosaur and you're going out of business. You know,
Yeah.
at one time, America had a thriving business manufacturing buggy whips. And I am sure that the last buggy whip company that existed made an amazing product. But most people have never even heard of buggy whips, never mind actually seen one,
Or
because
purchased one.
right, because the need for them is gone. And if you
Mm.
don't keep adapting, your business is going to die. And part of that adapting includes adapting to the changing face of the job market.
Yes. I
Now,
love that.
we actually went through a period where the shift was actually too dramatic and had to be pulled back. We had, I guess, officially it was the millennial generation. And you had people who were coming to job interviews with their parents
Oh.
because they were not capable of making a decision without mom or dad hovering over them. And we dealt with a lot of businesses that they said, well, how do we deal with this? And we told them point blank, you don't. This is
Right.
where you have to put your foot down. If someone is not capable of handling a job interview on their own, they're certainly not capable of doing the job.
And that's not to say if there's actual necessity. So I like to point out that grief is ADA protected. So if there was an ADA accommodation where if someone needed an interpreter, a translator, a support person, an advocate, or whatever, that's a completely different scenario. I want to make sure that we just identify that part. But on the general, I could never fathom the idea of bringing a parent to a job interview, even deep in grief. I think, wow, I didn't even know that was a thing.
Yeah, it was actually becoming very common. And, again, most of these folks were not hired. And there does, again, as I said earlier, we said there does have to be a level of responsibility on the part of the employee. There was a TikTok video, I think it's about a year or so ago, that went viral. This brand new college grad, new to the job market, was working, and the TikTok video was her whining about how 40 hours a week was just too much to work. She was too exhausted. She could, why can't she just work 10 hours a week so she has time to do her thing? Well, needless to say, several weeks after, she was fired for lack of performance.
Mm.
There has to be a level of not,
It's an at-will employment, right? It's both
yes.
parties agree to participate in this contract. And I think employees forget that component sometimes. It's at will for both sides.
Right. And when you're suffering from something like grief or depression, or you have a physical disability like you limited vision or limited mobility,
Mm.
it is not up to the employer to go, oh, we need to make accommodations. It is up to the employee to say, this is what's going on.
Yes.
This is either a temporary situation, such as grief, where I'm going to need some help to get through it, or this is a permanent disability, such as lack of vision, lack of
Sure.
mobility, and I'm going to need these accommodations
In
to,
perpetuity.
right, to make sure that I can get the job done. And the ADA actually does provide, saying the employer is responsible for making reasonable adjustments.
Yes.
So, you know, reasonable adjustments, unfortunately, is a vague description,
Yes.
but
Which can be both a blessing and a curse.
yes, but when both parties understand that the ultimate goal is to make the employee productive, both for the employee's self-worth and the benefit of the company, then you can negotiate and figure out what that happy medium is. And
Mm.
and this is actually a process that most business people really need to be used to, not just when dealing with employees, but in everyday business decisions. When technology needs to be updated, um, I did a lot of work with IT, and we used to have a joke that the ideal amount to spend on an IT project was twice as much as the CFO wanted to spend, but half as much as the IT people wanted to spend. It's
And for those out there who understand that very targeted select niche,
yes,
then they are all in.
right.
If you know, you know. You're not a stranger to grief, though, outside of business, right? As not just a business owner and a business coach, you've had your own personal experience with grief. And I'm sure that's shown up for you as an employee, not just an employer. Share with us some of your insights and experiences and how you bring that employee experience and that personal experience to your coaching and to your other businesses that you work with.
Yes, I have, unfortunately suffered more than my share of loss. I lost my father when I was 11.
Mm,
I lost my mother when I was 28, 29, something like that.
mm,
Um, and of course, both of those experiences were very different, but I was lucky enough to have very supportive people around me.
mm,
Um, but it does, impact you. And something that folks have to realize when dealing with someone dealing with grief is that it's not necessarily the obvious things that are going to cause a problem. When I was 11 years old, I lived in New York City, and New York City was going through a very severe drought. So
Mm.
everywhere, including in the classrooms, there were signs about how you could save water.
Huh.
Well, the sign that happened to be in my classroom, which was targeted to kids to help them get their parents to save water,
Yep.
actually said, turn the water off when your father is shaving.
Ugh, gut wrenching.
And I went into that classroom every day and looked at that sign. And
Mm.
that was triggering. Unfortunately, I actually said to my teacher, um, and to be fair, my father was actually a big part of the school community.
Mm.
He was a volunteer there. Anytime there was an event that they needed photography, my father was the unofficial school photographer.
I love
He
that.
he actually was a photographer in his day job. So this is what, so they all knew him. And in fact, the day of my father's funeral, the funeral home was actually 2 blocks away from my elementary school. The
Mm.
school called an assembly, put all of the students in the assembly, and showed a film so that the faculty and staff
Wow.
come to the funeral.
What a testament to the capacity of administration, right? Like the pushback
Yes.
and feedback that I hear all the time is that it's the way we've always done it, or our system doesn't allow for that, or I can't, or we can't, or we can't. And it is so easy to say yes instead of no in our businesses. How do we just meet people where they're at and hit that pause button and do the right thing, right? Send the sympathy card, go to the funeral, drop off a casserole, whatever, call them, text them, have the conversation in the office. Like, how are you today? Just be human. And the fact that, how many years ago was it when your father passed, for the faculty in that day and age to do it tells me that we beyond have the capacity to do it today.
Yeah, this was 44 years ago this
Yes.
happened.
And academia is
So,
one of the last places to make change or to do things outside of policy.
yes.
So I love that. So in
So
all of your grief experiences, how are you translating that to your business coaching from that employer and from that personal experience? How are you translating that into the work moving forward?
Well, a lot of it has to do with the very basics of our coaching system. Our coaching system, we call it human-centered achievement, and it's actually based in 4 scientific practices. We actually started with the program being based in quantum physics.
Interesting.
Yes. And in fact, my company, the Modern Observer Group, is named after the observer principle in quantum physics,
I did not know that.
which says that an event or an object is changed by the act of being observed.
Mm.
Which in this context means the person going through grief is actually changed by the person observing that grief.
Yes. What
So
a power.
it's not just the person that's going through it. There are external factors that affect that grief. Now, one of the other scientific platforms that we're built on is epigenetics. And this is a
Love
relatively
it.
new, field, but you've actually talked about epigenetics, whether you realized it or not.
I think I actually, in my last episode on the podcast, or I know I've talked to someone recently about epigenetics, and it's fascinating. For those who don't know what it is, can you give us just a brief little definition?
Yeah, essentially what it is that for decades since the discovery of DNA, the assumption was your genes were static. You were born with your genes, you died with those same genes. Epigenetics has discovered that that's not the case. That
Mm.
your environment changes your genes, your emotions change your genes. And that actually makes a lot more sense than most people realize, because if you think about what an emotion is in your body, an emotion is just a chemical reaction.
Mm-hmm.
So those chemicals change your genes. Now, when
Mm.
you have severe depression, severe grief, that has an impact on your genes. And you can then pass those effects on generationally.
Yes.
Conversely, though, you also have the ability to fix your genes and
Mm.
get rid of those negative effects before passing them on. So it works both ways. Now,
Fascinating.
the other scientific fields that our process is based on is neurology and psychology. Now, psychology obviously applies to grief. Neurology is just the biochemical and electrical impulses that go on inside the body that coincide with the psychology.
Yeah.
But when you work all four of those together, there are some very profound things that happen. And one of them is that you start to understand that you are limitless.
Mm.
Grief is something that happens. It is not who you are, and it's not going to define you. You have the
Mm.
ability to adapt to it, to grow past it. Now, one of the big drawbacks is that grief, like, causes stress. Now, biologically, we are programmed with a fight or flight mentality. And this
Mhm.
goes back to the days of early man, when it was literally
Your life depended on it.
a lion coming to eat you,
Yep. Your life literally depended on your response.
Right. So what your body did was it shut down everything except what was absolutely necessary for you to survive. And it flooded your system with adrenaline and endorphins
And
to,
cortisol.
and yes, and cortisol to make you operate at peak performance for that situation. Well, now it's very rare for you to be in an actual life or death situation. But when a stressful situation happens, like grief, like a deadline at work, your body still responds the same way.
Epigenetics.
Yes. Now, here's the really bad part about this. When you let this go on for too long, your body actually becomes addicted
A
to the
custom.
extra. No, it's not a custom.
Oh, it's
It's
addicted.
addicted to
Interesting.
the increased stress level, which then in turn starts deteriorating your health.
Is that why I overschedule my calendar and always feel like garbage? Oh
I,
no.
it could be a factor in it. So we actually have to learn, and this is something we work with our clients on, to change their mindset so that they start to understand that things like grief and depression are not inevitable, they're not overwhelming, and they're not permanent. They're
Mm.
situations to be dealt with. And we provide them with coping mechanisms. We provide them with mindset shifts. And I say this like it's incredibly simple, and it is simple, but just because it's simple doesn't make it easy.
Thank you.
You
Love
know,
that.
it's it's very, what you have to do is simple. Actually accomplishing it takes a lot of work.
Say that louder for the people in the
Yeah,
back.
yeah.
Just because it's simple does not mean it's easy.
Right. So
But
that's
Craig
that's
used to
something
say the easy way is hardly ever the right way.
that's true. We actually use a statement very similar, The road not taken usually doesn't get you anywhere.
Yeah.
There's a reason that we have obstacles. There's a reason that we go through turmoil, and that is how we grow. And again, we always use the analogy of a physical fitness workout. When you
Mm.
are lifting weights, what you are literally doing is damaging your muscles. And then during the
Ah.
off period, your muscles are healing, and that is how you get stronger. It is not just the lifting of the weights, it's the
Mm.
healing part of it that actually makes you stronger and builds your health. Mentally, it works the same way. If you never had any obstacles, if you never had any grief, anything you had to overcome, you would not build resilience. You would not grow and become stronger.
And that applies to employers for their own grief as well. You have the unique opportunity to be on both sides of that coin, where we've talked about how employers reach their employees. We've talked about how employees are accountable and transparent and have, reasons and resources. But as someone, as a business owner myself, with my own grief, right? We talked about this the other day, where last month I was unknowingly super depressed. And then I came out of the fog because I had grief triggers. And that means I didn't show up in my business and as a business owner in the best way. But at the end of the day, I can't go back and change that. And I know why it happened and how it happened and what happened. All I can do is be accountable. So when I saw you the other day, what did I say? It was like, hey, listen, my brain wasn't working and I'm
Yeah.
so sorry. And to just be transparent and be accountable and show up with your own experience, something super uncomfortable for me. And I guess it's a little bit different because I'm just me, one business owner, no employees, no. For you, you have other people you work with. So what's your advice for employers or business owners who maybe didn't realize they were having grief or have an experience and then have to show up at work? What could you say to those people?
Yeah. The first thing is you do have to, especially as an employer, understand that you are accountable for what you do. A business isn't just about the owner. There's the customers that are depending on the product or service. There's the employees. There's the community that relies on all of their businesses to generate their economy. So
Mm.
business is, in every sense of the word, an ecosystem. And you have to understand that as part of that ecosystem, you have to be accountable. Now, that doesn't mean you're not allowed to feel, but you do have to put systems in place. As we said earlier, you have to have processes that you can go through if you have the flu.
Or the grief flu.
Right, yes.
Because it's like the same thing sometimes. I feel like
And
grief can show up very physical ailment style. So if
well,
you're
there is actually very little difference between severe grief, severe depression, and a severe physical illness, whether it's the
mm,
flu or COVID. They tend to have the same effects on the body, the same effects on the mind, and the same effects on the people around you.
not in the contagious kind of way like the flu, but
Actually,
certainly,
actually, there is a contagious portion
really.
of it. This is something that we teach in mindset. And on the most basic level, I always use the example everybody has a relative like this, where
Oh
you
boy.
you see the relative, at Thanksgiving or at the holidays or family get-togethers, and hey, how are you doing? Oh, it's terrible. My job is rotten. It's like my life is, and they're always wallowing in that. Well,
Mm,
how much do you want to be around that person?
not much.
Right, because that brings you down. And
Hmm.
that mindset is actually contagious. And it works the same way with a positive mindset. When you're upbeat, When you have that positive mindset, it actually attracts people to you because that is also contagious.
Mm.
Now, having a positive mindset does not mean seeing the world through rose-colored glasses. Everything's wonderful.
It's
Everything's always going to
not
be
toxic
wonderful.
positivity, let's be
Right.
clear.
Yes, that is
And just to
toxic
say the other side,
positivity.
the negative feeling and the wallowing, there's a threshold, right? Like you are entitled to have your sad feelings and your bad feelings, and we don't want people in grief to mask or fake it or pretend. But there comes a point where it's like we have to start moving through it, because if we keep doing the same negative spinning of our wheels, we're going to start pushing people away and burning those bridges that we desperately need as grievers.
All right, but you also have to look at why you're in that negative place. If you're suffering grief because you just had a major loss, whether it's a loved one has died, the loss of a home, the loss of a
Mm,
job, those are actually the three largest sources of stress, is loss of a loved one, loss of a home, loss of a job. If you're going through something like that, that is a reason that triggered this grief. And that's something you have to deal with the underlying cause and accept, and figure out how you're going to adapt. But if the reason that you are feeling, you're in this negative place is your boss just gave you an assignment that you don't want to do, this
mm.
is this is not a legitimate,
Yeah.
this is just you're being negative because you're trapped in a negative mindset.
Mindset is everything in general, but specifically in grief. I know from personal experience, sometimes your brain tells you lies and you have to talk yourself off a ledge, and not in like a severe, deep depression way, but you can
Yes.
feel the sad, or you can feel the decline, and you can feel it perpetuate, and learn yourself and do meditations and reflections, and that will help you kind of discover where your personal threshold is. At least for me, that was
Yes. Yeah.
helpful. But it's interesting that you point that out.
Your mind will almost always lie to you because we all have this voice in the back of our head, in the subconscious and unconscious parts of our brain, that its job is to keep you from harm. But
Mm,
it thinks that every challenge is harmful. Anything that can go wrong is harmful. So it is overprotective. And there's lots of people that say, oh, I don't have that little voice. The part of you that's telling you you don't have that little voice is that little voice.
surprise.
Yes. And the problem is that's the part of you that says, oh, you could get hurt if you try to do that. Maybe it's better if
Mm,
you don't try. You know, oh, you could be very disappointed if that doesn't work out. Maybe it's better if you don't
mm.
do it.
You've been hurt before.
Right.
Let's not do anything similar.
Exactly. You've lost somebody you cared about. So maybe it's better if you don't put yourself out there and don't get that close to people. This way, when they leave, you won't be hurt. Well, yes,
Mm,
technically, yes, that is
true.
to try to protect you, but it's also a way to keep you from living. You are
Yes.
going to be a hermit in a little cocoon, never actually experiencing life. You may be surviving, but you're not living.
I recently read a quote that said, you have to go on adventures to figure out who you are.
Yes, we always say you have to go out on a limb. That's where the opportunities are.
Because fruit grows at the end of the branch.
Right.
Well, we are just about at the end of our time together today, but I do want to ask you the same question I've asked everybody else this season. If you could give one piece of advice to someone who's grieving, what would you say?
The one piece of advice I would have is to understand that you have more control over this than you think you do. It
Mm,
always feels overwhelming. And, I mentioned my father passed away when I was 11. I went through years of depression after that was never diagnosed until after the fact, and most people did not realize.
Mm,
But one of the things that I learned is that, yes, you have more control over it than you think you do. And as much as it hurts right now, you're going to learn to adapt to it. And
mm,
you're never going to not miss that person. You're never going to not be sad that that person isn't in your life anymore. But
mm,
you can reach a point where that sadness has no hold on you, that it's a reminder of who that person was. And you can use that reminder to trigger positive memories.
mm. The
So,
pain becomes nostalgia.
yes. So it's, yes, I'm sorry that that person's no longer with me, but I am so grateful for the time we had. And I remember these great times. You know, I very often, I have been told by people that I have had a very hard life. And
Mm,
it's funny because probably until I was in my mid 20s, I never really thought about it. I just thought, well, this was life. This was what everybody went through.
yeah.
In retrospect, people have asked me, knowing what I've gone, all the things I've gone through, would I change anything? And I always tell them with no hesitation, no, because all of those things I went through made me who I am now.
Mm,
And right now, I like the person I am.
yeah. Well, I like you too, Eric.
Thank you.
And I'm sure all the listeners out there are going to like you as well. Why don't you tell them where they can find you if they're looking for some support for their business? Maybe they need some coaching. They want to read your best selling book. Where can the listeners find you?
Yeah, you can go to modernobserver.com. That's my corporate site. You can read our articles on there about primarily about business, also quite a bit about mindset. There is a calendar link on there where you can schedule a call with me and talk through, what you need and see if we're a good fit for you. And I've got two books that are out. One is The Biznetics Way, which is about our coaching program. The other is Cracking the Rich Code, Volume 14. That was an actual international bestseller. Both of those are available at bookstores everywhere. And I do have a third book coming out
Yeah.
called Yes You Can. And if we can work out the timing of this, we are trying to launch this book when I speak at Kate's Grief Conference in September.
Beautiful segue. I was just going to announce that as well. So that is amazing to hear. So you heard it hot off the press. Eric Lopkin will be at the Grief Awareness and Education Conference happening in Hartford, Connecticut on September 20th. For more information on that event and to catch Eric speaking live and in person about the intersection of grief in business, go to eventbrite.com/GAEC. And for that, this is the end of our episode. Thank you again for joining me in this conversation. Until next time, with grief and gratitude, I'm your host, Kate Mollison. Eric, any last thoughts?
Just, I want all of your listeners to remember that you can do more than you ever thought possible, but you have to take action and start doing it.
Yes, I love it. The laws of physics no longer apply.
You've been listening to Happily Never After, part of the Xvadio podcast network. You can catch every episode of Happily Never After, as well as the rest of the network at xvadio.com, the Apple Podcasts app, YouTube, Rumble, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, Amazon Music, and wherever you find podcasts.